Hi everybody, my name is Holly Lowery and I'm an eating disorder recovery coach and the education and communications director for Ophelia's Place, which is a nonprofit who helps folks who are impacted by eating disorders, disordered eating, and body image find support, connection to treatment, and education and other resources. So it is my pleasure today to get to answer this question for the Everybody's Beautiful Project Need a Week campaign. And the question that I was tasked with to answer and to provide some insight around is a big one. And it is, how can we handle conversations that involve diet culture or diet talk without sounding preachy? And this person writes that they want to help people because so many people are setting themselves up for failure with diets, right? Which I totally get, but without creating that barrier, without creating that wall, right? Because it is a very sensitive subject. So I have some thoughts. And the first thing that I think is important to remember going into any conversation that involves differing opinions, that is sensitive by nature, is that we ourselves have to feel supported first. And so what that means is we really have to think about, okay, what is it going to take for me to sort of hold my ground, but from a place of compassion and understanding in this conversation. For me, that often looks like making sure I take some deep breaths throughout that conversation beforehand. It also looks like just checking in with myself, with my body. Am I tense throughout it? If so, can I relax? Right? And that's a practice because it's hard to remain present when we're in that conversation, but really, really important for us to be able to hold space and listen to where that person's at, and also then offer some compassion and maybe some resources, support, and our opinion, our point of view, again, from that space of understanding. And that's where we're able to share without sounding preachy, right? My next thing that I always try to do is to ask questions. And this is hard because sometimes we don't know what's the right question to ask, but if somebody's sharing about a diet that worked for them or whatever sort of rules they're following around food or fitness right now that worked for them, can be really hard to figure out, okay, well, they're saying it works for them, right? So where do I go from there? And so I would even start by asking, well, what about that works for you, right? Like, what does that mean? What does it mean that it's working for you? Is it about health? Is it about weight? Is it about figuring out how to just feel good in our bodies, right? And when we can start to ask those questions, we gain a little bit of insight into where that person's really at to start with, right? And then so the next piece is to meet people where they're at. And that might sound a little obvious and it might sound a little elementary, but it's really not. It's, you ask any therapist, any person who's doing this work and working with folks who are struggling, how do you reach that person when they're so deep in it? And the response is always to meet them where they're at, knowing that it's not our job to fix people. It is our job to just listen and to hold space and to offer support when we can and when that person's ready to hear it. But if they're not ready to hear it, that's okay, and that it may not be the right time for it. However, part of meeting people where they're at is also sort of coming to this understanding with ourselves that it's still, I think, important for us to be spreading these messages, to be deconstructing diet culture, to be advocating for ourselves and for other folks who have been struggling with things like eating disorders and body image, because of, for many folks, it comes down to the rigid beauty ideals we have in our culture. From others, it comes from a place of past trauma that they've got to work through. Many times those two are definitely connected, because it can be traumatic to be living in a body that doesn't come close to those rigid beauty ideals, right? And so knowing that sometimes folks might not be ready to hear sort of where we're at, that we can still meet them where they're at and that we can still plant a seed is what's most important. Because it's not our job to fix them in that moment, to make them see the light. It's our job to just plant the seed, right? And what I always have to remind myself of is that when people aren't in that space where they're ready to sort of investigate this more intuitive approach to food, that the first place anybody's ever coming from is that place of denial. They don't even know that there might be something better or more intuitive or more sustainable out there. And so if we can just plant a seed, those seeds over time are going to add up, and maybe that person's going to shift from that space of denial to this space of contemplation where they're considering, okay, maybe this doesn't feel good. Maybe this doesn't feel sustainable. Maybe there's something different out there. What would that look like, right? Where they're starting to explore. And that is frustrating as, somebody who wants to like make all this change and change the culture and change the world, because it's slow. But that is the process. So understanding that the work we're doing is still important, even though it's slow by nature, and it's planting one seed after another. And then the next big tip, I guess, that I have to offer is something that I think works almost every single time in these conversations, and it's a little bit more of a format, so I hope that this helps. And that is to first share a personal experience before we share data, right? So there is so much data out there to support that dieting actually is harmful to our health, that many folks who have pursued weight loss through dieting attempts are actually not in as good a state of health as somebody who's just naturally letting their bodies live where they want to when it comes to weight, right? There's so much data out there to support that, but when we throw that data out there first, many a times that creates a wall, right? And so how we make that connection first is by sharing a personal experience. How a history of dieting actually harmed us, or if somebody's sharing something about the keto diet, how maybe we had a personal experience with that sent us spiraling, and we sort of had to do all this work to dig out of it, right? Whatever that personal experience is for you in that moment, share that first, and then offer some data to support that, right? And some resources perhaps to point that person to if they want to learn more. Because when we share that personal experience, it's really, really hard for that person to keep their walls up, because they're connecting with that personal experience just like we're connecting with the fact that they may be struggling, right? And so that's where that humanness comes in, and we're able to start to have these deeper conversations that actually dig in, that we actually integrate, and those seeds, again, there are planted. So I hope that helps. These conversations are never easy, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who's trying to have them in their communities, their spaces, their families, because it's really, really important. So thank you guys, and I wish you the best of the remainder of Need a Week. Thanks for listening.